Good evening. For those of you that weren't here earlier for the screening of The War Room, my name is Elleithee, and I am Executive Director of the Institute of Politics and Public Service at the McCourt School here at Georgetown. And welcome to the first panel discussion of our Clinton 25 Symposium, commemorating the 25th anniversary of President Bill Clinton, SFS Class of '68, and his election to the presidency. Tonight we're focusing on the campaign, and I am one of the coolest parts of this symposium for me is actually that I get to lead this conversation with some people that are just legends in the business and who are part of the reason why Bill Clinton was elected and why we had a Hoya in the White House. So I'm going to step down. I'm going to toss it over to Hanna, the Chief of Staff, to take care of some business, and then we'll move on to the formal introductions and get the conversation started.
For the record, you don't have to clap after this one because it's just really boring housekeeping that just has to be done. So thank you for coming to this event, everyone. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that not everyone may share the same views as our speakers, we do expect everyone here to respect the rights of our speakers, to share their perspectives and ideas by not causing a disruption to our activities here tonight. At the conclusion, there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask questions and engage in dialogue that is limited just to members of the Georgetown community, students, faculty, and staff. Once you get up to ask a question, please be sure to do that in the form of a question. That's a really important detail here. And then we ask that each person be concise and ask only one question. Without further ado, I'm excited to get back to the fun portion of the night and introduce Omar Torres, who is a senior in the college. Thank you all.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the delicious dinner. On behalf of GU Politics, thank you for joining us today for this exciting conversation. My name is Omar Torres. I'm a senior in the college, double majoring in government and economics. Since its founding in the fall of 2015, I have been involved in GU Politics as part of a fellow student strategy team, a member of the special ops team, and now as a second-term member of the student advisory board. As I finish my journey here at Georgetown as an undergrad, I certainly owe GU Politics for being an essential part of my formation as a Hoya. It is an honor to introduce this outstanding group of panelists today for our discussion on President Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign. James Carville was a senior strategist in President Clinton's 1992 campaign and is one of America's best-known political consultants, as well as an 8-time New York Times best-selling author. Mr. Carville has worked in political races in more than 23 countries, and now, after decades of political victories and upsets, he has returned to his home state of Louisiana, where he teaches at Tulane University. In the past 50 years, only 4 Democrats have won the White House. Paul Begala helped 2 of them. A senior strategist in President Clinton's 1992 campaign and a global political consultant, Mr. Begala brings a world of experience to the nation's long-term political landscape. He also teaches at Georgetown's McCourt School of Public Policy. As media advisor and director of advertising during President Clinton's campaign, Mandy Grunwald was a critical component of President Clinton's victory. She has an enviable record with over 14 victorious Senate races and 8 governor's races, including Elizabeth Warren's and Hillary Clinton's first Senate races. We also have the pleasure of welcoming Secretary Rodney Slater. After serving several state government positions under the then governor of Arkansas, Secretary Slater became the first African American director of the Federal Highway Administration. After spending over 3 years at the FHA, he was appointed to be the Secretary of Transportation. Lastly, moderating our discussion today, we welcome the Executive Director of GU Politics, Elleithee. A veteran of 4 presidential campaigns, most recently serving as Communications Director and Chief Spokesman of the Democratic National Committee, Mo brings decades of communications experience to the table. I want to invite you all to join the conversation through social media using the hashtag Clinton25 and tagging @GUPolitics. Without further ado, I pass it on to Mo and this great group of panelists to begin this conversation. Thank you all.
Omar, thank you so much for for your introduction, and you have been a great member of our student advisory board. So thank you for being a part of it. So I spent 20 years between my time as an undergrad here at Georgetown and coming back to Georgetown. I spent 20 years as a campaign hack, and it was the 1992 campaign that inspired me to actually do this for a living. So to sit up here with these four people, several of whom I've known for some time and worked with, is really an honor. I do want to take a moment before we get started, though, and just say, pause for a moment of reflection for the victims of the tragic shooting that happened tonight outside of San Antonio. So if we could just take one moment. All right, thank you. So let's get started. What I want to do tonight is have a conversation that's less of a tick-tock of what happened through the campaign and more just kind of thematically how you approached it from a messaging perspective, from an organizational perspective, what it meant for the party and what it meant for political campaigns since then. And I want to start actually before the campaign. And Secretary Slater, if we could start with you. You arguably have known Bill Clinton longer than anybody else here. You worked with him in the governor's office in Arkansas before joining the campaign. And so take us back to those early days. When and why did he decide to run?
Well, first of all, I'm always hesitant to say that I've known the president longer than anyone here, because invariably there is someone who talks about kindergarten and junior high, that sort of thing. I mean, he has more friends, the friends of Bill, and I'm honored to be included among them. I first met the president in 1979. I was introduced to him by my father-in-law, who was a member of the General Assembly in Arkansas. And he actually said as early as 1984 that he thought that our governor could become president. But it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to assemble the kind of talent that's necessary to do it, and to build the kind of record that's necessary to recommend you for the highest office in the land. Many know that in 1988, he considered running. And there was actually a meeting at the governor's mansion to discuss the issue without anyone knowing exactly what he would decide to do. But he decided that he needed to maybe take a bit more time. And I think on reflection, it was a good decision. But politically, I think you have to take into account the fact that it's one thing to run for an open seat. It's another thing to challenge an incumbent. And so while he did not run in '88 when the seat was open, although technically you've got the vice president who is the best shot at being considered an incumbent, but not an incumbent, not in the way that President Bush was in '92. That to miss that opportunity is to miss a real opportunity. And it puts you in the position of having an uphill battle when you're running to unseat someone. And so 1992 comes along, and he clearly is in the race, starting in '91, really, I guess in October. And he makes his case. But I underscore the fact that he could not make that case without friends and without assembling a quality team. And I'm just honored myself to acknowledge that the talent that's assembled here was really the kind of talent that was necessary to afford a very talented, but still from a small state governor, the opportunity to become known, to be seen as a potential president, and to make the case to win in a very tough campaign, not only in the primary, but in the general as well.
So, James and Paul, you were partners, political consultants. You had just come off of a couple of big wins, Zell Miller in Georgia, Bob Casey, governor of Pennsylvania. But it was the Harris-Wofford special election in '91 that really kind of put the two of you on the map. And every presidential candidate, prospective presidential candidate, comes a courting. James, why don't you tell us about that first meeting with Bill Clinton and what sold you that he was the guy?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. You know, I've loved college. That's 4 years of my I mean, the best 4 years of my life was spent as a sophomore at LSU. You know, for 11 years. You know, I would, Paul, but, you know, I don't know. It's like the first time somebody saw Babe Ruth play. I mean, it was just evident that this guy was like better than anything else that you were ever going to see. I mean, this is not a knock on anybody else and not a knock on anybody I've known in politics or any of the people that I've worked for abroad or anything else. I mean, come on. I mean, this was like, what did David Meredith say, The Natural? And I mean, the combination of communication skills, the grasp of things, the understanding, you know, 7 things that are going on at the same time. I'm like, oh my God, you know, look at this. And you know, and here I am, a dyed-in-the-wool, you know, white Southern Democrat, you know, who became who I am because of, you know, civil rights. And here's a guy who's like, only thing separate him and I is 150 IQ points. But yeah, I'd ask Paul, but my reaction was, oh shit, look at this guy.
we were at a hotel on Capitol Hill, and we walked out, and James turned to me and said, my only question is this guy too good to be true?
Yeah.
And that's interesting because, by the way, a lot of voters thought that too.
Yeah.
Like, here's a little inside secret. You know how he would like bite his lip sometimes and hesitate before he answered? That was coached. Because he was so fast and so glib. We're like, could you just pretend that you're like thinking and looking at the mental files? We sat there with him. I still remember this like it was yesterday. We sat there with him. And I don't know any politician's done this before. He treated us, 2 hacks, like we were citizens, like we cared about our country. And he didn't say, look, I'm from the South, I can consolidate, you know, the Southern vote, my wife's from Chicago, and that'll help us in the Illinois primary. It was not about strategy. He sat and talked to us about 2 things. About his little girl. Was his girl gonna come of age into a world where children were no longer doing better than their parents for the first time in a century? And second, would we be coming together or coming apart? These 2 things, by the way, are still what's dominating our politics today, right? The tectonic plates of. Anybody here a geology major? Okay. Well, there's compressional, you know, volcanoes are sometimes followed by compressional pressure, plates on top of each other, and sometimes tensional pressures, plates pulling apart. We're going through both now. We were going through both then. And he was so good about explaining all of that and where we were as a country. And I do commend to you all. This is, you know, he was not that many years out of Georgetown. And I went back today. You should do this. I read his announcement speech, I read his convention address. And I read them now, as much older than he was at that time, but from someone who has spent 17 years teaching here. And by the way, who sent 4 kids to Gonzaga, the Jesuit high school in D.C. And I read it really differently, knowing that he was a Hoya. I mean, I knew he was a Hoya then, but I didn't know your culture. And I'm serious, it's all about, he had a professor, Carol Quigley. He used to do an impression of him on the road for Rodney and me.
Sure did.
He had a Boston accent, and you can imagine Bill Clinton trying to do a Boston accent.
Slowly.
But he'd sit with us on the plane, and he would like repeat Carol Quigley's lectures, and it came down to 2 words, the future preference. Yeah. Why is America the greatest country in the history of the world? Because at every critical juncture, we have chosen to prefer the future to the present. Care more about our children than about ourselves. And every American has a personal moral obligation to make it so. He was taught that here. And it is marbled through his life and his career. I'm serious. What started here, the values of this institution, had a much more profound effect on him than I appreciated at the time.
I want to pick up on this, Mandy. There's a quote that we actually have on the front of our program from his '92 convention speech, which I just love. It said, "Just remember what the scripture says. Where there is no vision, the people perish. I hope nobody in this great hall tonight or in our beloved country has to go through tomorrow without a vision. I hope no one ever tries to raise a child without a vision. I hope nobody ever starts a business or plants a crop in the ground without a vision. For where there is no vision, the people perish." Now, he got mocked by a little bit for that vision thing, right? But you had to tell his story to millions of Americans through television. Encapsulate that vision for us.
Well, first, I have to say, he knew why he wanted to be president. And that isn't a small thing. And he had spent those years since '88, but even earlier, really thinking through how to fix things. How do you solve that welfare problem? How do you help create jobs? What do you do to give people a better path? How do you deal with trade? He's a policy wonk. And he had dug in and dug in. He had run the Democratic Governors Association, maybe the National Governors Association. He was a collector of good ideas. And once you run for president, once you announce, it is very hard to ever think again. You are shot out of a cannon and you just do. And so he came to it knowing exactly what he wanted to talk about and what he wanted to do as president. That's part of the vision thing. He also had a vision for what the Democratic Party should be that he had been putting to work in Arkansas, but he had for the country. And I just have to step back before I do the biography. It is hard to explain how in the wilderness the Democratic Party was at the moment he announced. You all are used to 8 years of Barack Obama. You probably remember 8 years of Bill Clinton. We all had a quarter of a century with no Democrat in the White House except 4 brief years of Jimmy Carter because Nixon had gotten kicked out. Otherwise, that building had nothing to do with our party, and we had lost over and over again. James used to say people were out for life. You know, they had people who'd worked on 4 presidential campaigns and never won one. And we didn't know as a party, what could we ever be a national winning party? And Bill Clinton also had a vision, not just of what he wanted to do to improve the economy, to meet the challenges of, a new century that was about to turn. He had a vision of what the party should be and who it should speak to make it a more universal party, to reach out beyond our base and bring people into it. And to speak, really, he talked about in that announcement speech, the forgotten middle class. And that was, putting people first became the slogan of the campaign. But really the forgotten middle class, which, was very painful to hear Donald Trump appropriate in various ways. But that was what the campaign was about. That was what the vision was about. And it was about opportunity. And if you want to know the substance of it, the speeches he gave here at Georgetown, the New Covenant speeches, are still an incredible resource to understand. And he really followed them. He gave those in the fall of '91.
October, November,
And
December.
3 of them, right?
Yes,
And,
all 4.
and they were one was on foreign policy, one, I don't even remember what all the specifics were, but
The economy.
in there you will
Economy,
see
on
what that
civil
vision
society.
thing was.
That's right.
And still, it wasn't until I think we really explained his life story that all that lit up for people. Because as Paul said, in some ways people thought he was too good to be true, or what is this young guy doing? Who is this young? He looks so young compared to the people who had been president before, and George H.W. Bush, who was in the White House. And we kept winning primaries and still being in a world of hurt politically. And we were going to win the nomination, and we headed to the conventions in 3rd place, so behind both the president and Ross Perot. So, we all look like geniuses now, but it didn't look so good. It didn't look so good then. And we felt we had to tell that personal story, which everyone knows, the man from Hope. And we went to a famous set of focus groups.
James will remember them, where telling that story and talking about the single mother who raised him and the town of Hope that he grew up in just totally changed when he was talking about helping the middle class, when they knew he came from a single mother who had like scrimped and saved to put him through college and get him where he was. Everything changed because his credibility changed. And that was the insight it took us a little while to get to, but which drove the convention and the general election.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was an undergrad here. I was a junior when I guess it was maybe my sophomore year when he first came to deliver those New Covenant speeches in Gaston Hall. I was in the audience, and I remember him really redefining what I thought a Democrat was. And I'd love maybe one of you to kind of pick up on that. But the second part, which Mandy, you just alluded to as well, one of the things I learned in my career in politics is that it's not always about the policy, right? That people are voting based on character and the person. And character became a big issue in both ways, right?
Yeah.
Both with President Bush and with then Governor Clinton. And so what were the character traits that you all were hoping would kind of pop, that would penetrate the minds of the voters, that they would remember when they went into the voting booth? So two very different questions, but how did he redefine what it meant to be a Democrat? And then who was the Bill Clinton you were trying to show people?
Yeah, I can make a stab at that initially, but remember he was also a part of what was called the DLC.
Right.
And many called it the Democratic Leisure Class.
Right.
And there were others who had even other names for it as well. But it was the Democratic Leadership Council. And basically it was about a third way. It was about leading from the center out and not being limited by sort of binary choices. And so he would say that you can be for government and for stimulating the engine of the private sector. That you could be for management, for labor. That you could be for civil rights, but also be for law and order. And that really takes a subtlety when it comes to the use of language, when it comes to the crafting of policy. But he was willing to stake out that ground. And some would say, well, that's Republican light. I mean, so if you want to be disparaging, you would say, where is the core to that? How do you find that rooted in anything that, that speaks to what a Democrat or a partisan should be about? But if you really search the founding of this country, it was all about compromise. And it was about setting the stage for moving to the more perfect union. He understood that clearly. And so he could, in one instance, be, one who appreciates the power of the states, so Jeffersonian in that regard, but also one who appreciated the power of a strong central government, Hamilton, in that sense. And that's what he sought to sell. And it took people who could help him craft the message. Now, I agree with James that these natural abilities were there. And you get a chance to hone that in a place like New Hampshire when you're running for president. Right. But if you happen to be from a small state where people know you, you're forced to do that on a daily basis. And so I do think that Arkansas was very, very helpful to him in that regard. I also think that it was possibly a good thing that he lost in 1980. Now, that's something that I don't know that I've ever expressed. And I definitely wouldn't express it in his presence that way. But it really did humble him in a way that actually strengthened him. Because what he did was he came back and he apologized. He apologized not necessarily for the loftiness of his ideas, but not recognizing that you have to take people where they are and bring them along. And that was the lesson learned in 1980. And so he put that into action in 82, and really from that point on. One other point, and then I'll leave it to others to offer other thoughts, but I think Mandy is right on point when she talks about his story. But you should recognize that he believes that everybody has a story. Mm-hmm. And it's unique, and it's valuable, and it's authentic. And that's why when people meet him, you know, they just say, hey, he was just focused on me. Well, yes, because he wants to get that. And see, he's interesting in that regard because getting that gives him what is needed to give life to a policy. When you can connect that policy that is talking about left and right and, you know, third way and that sort of thing, and you personalize it with a personal story, then it's given volume, it's given heft. It's given strength, it's given power and force. And he was really a master at that. And these stories were inspiring to him, okay? Because for him, that was the story of America, because that's the promise of America. And all he wanted to do was to be in a position to ensure that those kinds of stories had an opportunity to sort of burst through the concrete.
Well, the other thing you have to say is the economy, while he was running, was in the tank. Unemployment was 10, 11%. I mean, it was a very bad moment economically for the country. You know, James put that sign in the war room, it's the economy, stupid. We were running a complex campaign in many ways and a simple campaign once we got to the general. It was a change campaign.
Right.
People thought the economy was not working for them. They thought the president didn't get it, and they thought he'd raised taxes, but also basically not done anything, not taken action. And part of the character point we cared about the compassion that Rodney's talking about. He understood people, he heard people, he got people. That's why we did town halls. That's why, you know, he had a way of connecting to people that was important. But it was also a pretty simple change campaign, and he was a man of action. And he, the fact that he wanted to take action to help people was kind of the whole deal.
You may have just answered in part my next question, but a lot of people don't remember President Bush, just months before Governor Clinton announced, had approval ratings near 90%.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it is hard to knock off an incumbent president under any circumstance.
Exactly.
But his numbers were like 90% approval, so high it knocked out a lot of other big-name Democrats that thought about running.
Most people thought it was preposterous
Exactly.
that anyone
To
could
even
beat
run.
him.
That's
all,
right.
all of the big name Democrats.
Right?
Al Gore, Sam Nunn, Dick Gephardt,
Cuomo.
Jay Rockefeller, Mario Cuomo, all the big name Democrats stepped back.
So
because
you
of
all
that.
sit down to begin to map out this campaign and this strategy. Yeah, how the hell do you do that when you
He
got
was-
90% approval rating for your
I'm
opponent?
talking about where he was. He was certain.
So you're questioning
could
our
win.
sanity.
Right.
It worked.
No, I mean, I was for him because of the jobs issue. I needed a job. He's one of the hiring me. It's like, okay, that's easy. But he was confident. Even
Yes.
the day he announced President Bush was at 78, the day Governor Clinton announced President Bush was at 78. And he went right at the heart of his strength. This is a really good sign in a politician. Right at him. He said, a strong America begins at home. He said he had these great ways to frame it up that way, right? He said the president rightly moves heaven and earth to help an emir who's lost his job, but he does nothing for you when you lose yours. Hey, in his convention speech, he talked about how Lincoln went to McClellan and said, if you're not going to use your army, may I borrow it? And he took a breath and he looked right in the camera and he said, Mr. President, if you're not going to use your power to help people, step aside, I will. Okay, so Bush was enormously successful in the Gulf War. But he used that then in a jiu-jitsu way against him, and it's a lot, he's a complicated guy. There's a lot of, rural Arkansas populist in this guy. Mm-hmm. He loved saying they've raised taxes on people who drive pickup trucks and cut them on the people who ride limousines. Okay? It would happen to be true, but instead of just like usually, the class, the rich, the poor, he put it in a way that he used to call them walking around folks. This is how walking around folks see this.
Yeah.
And I do think that sensibility, especially in our party, is really, really important. He because of that, empathy that Mandy and Rodney have been talking about. He would never condescend because he came from those folks. He talked about this grandfather who only had a grade school education and was raising him while his mother was getting a nursing degree. And before there was food stamps, he was one of the only people in Hope, Arkansas that would let black and white customers shop in his store, and he just kept a ledger
That's right.
of who owed him. And he said, my grandfather would just take note. And he said, I would take note too. And I learned to look up to people everybody else looked down on. I mean, he just had this way, and it all comes from empathy. Mm-hmm. And they mocked him for that when he said, I feel your pain. There's an AIDS activist in New York at one of his rallies, and he started yelling at him because we weren't doing enough about AIDS. This is when he was a candidate. And he stopped, he said, I feel your pain. And all the right, to this day they mock him about that. Yeah. That's the essence of morality. Any major religion, any decent philosophy begins with empathy. If you can't feel somebody else's pain, you're not a good person. And I think that's the most important quality of president. Smart as he is, good talker, policy, it's that empathy, that compassion that really drove him.
Yeah, look, all history happens in context. And you have to think that the difference between in 1992, when we're sitting here in 2016, but it's like the Hubert Humphrey people having a forum saying what to do. I mean, there's a lot of green between now and 1992. The Democratic Party had been slaughtered, and we had become across as being culturally completely out of touch with the country. Right. We nominated McGovern, got a great guy, and then Jimmy Carter came across as ineffective, and then Mondale was an old-line liberal. And then we had Dukakis, who was, portrayed as the kind of out-of-touch Massachusetts liberal in the party. We're sort of hungry, and we're looking to say this is not the Democratic Party that you have been accustomed to, that you have rejected time and time again. It had to be a new Democratic Party, and the Democrats around the country were ready to win. Yeah. And I can't, I tell my students this: there are two strains of progressive politics in the United States, the Democratic politics, center-left, I don't care what you call it, liberal politics. And there's one that says we're really about doing, about ideological purity, that we can't sell out, we have to adhere to our principles, we got to be just down the line, and if we just do that, it's going to be. There's another side that says politics is a very difficult human business, and that it is conducted in the trenches and the capillaries of society, and that you fight as hard as you can to get something. You move forward 2 steps, you move back 1, you're glad you did that, you keep fighting ahead. The first is, that kind of politics is personified by Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt. The second is a bunch of ideological buffoons. And anybody that thinks that you're going to get in this business and that you're going to walk around with some kind of a litmus test that you're going to score up, well, let's see, on, this issue, he's a 9 out of 10, and this person's a whatever. That's not the way it works. And it is a fraud to tell young people that. It is a fraud. If you get into politics, you're going to lose. You get into politics, you're going to think that you want something, and you're going to have to push back. In all of the advancements we've made, from Medicare to health care to family and medical leave, to all of the things we've done, have been done after exhausted fights and by very narrow margins. And so people come in, and the Democratic Party at that time was like, shit, just win, man. All right, there was a little bit of an attitude there. Yeah. And what really concerns me is that if we lose the pragmatism that that Madison had, or Lincoln had, or Roosevelt had, or Obama had, or Clinton had, even to some extent Reagan had. Well, he said, look, I'll take, if I can get most of what I want, I'll take less. Right. If we lose that, we're going to drive ourselves off the cliff, because that was where we were in the 70s. And it is not where, it does not comport with reality. And at the end of the day, you're doomed to fail. And, you have to understand, I think that obviously President Clinton understood that. I think at some level, I mean, if you were a guy, that came up and you saw what the hell that, in the South, and so much of my political stuff is defined by civil rights, and Lyndon Johnson correctly said, I'm signing away the Democratic Party in the South. And you knew that there were consequences and difficulties associated with politics. And, you know, I mean, we were all ideologically, you know, I don't think we had great ideological differences of all the four of us here or all, anybody in the campaign, but I just, a note of caution about ideological purity. That's not the way the country was built. That's not the way to win elections, and that's not the future of the country, I don't think. But, you know, my high horse here.
I agree. Hey, well, something comes to mind, especially listening to James there, and there are two things. One occurred before we were all together, and clearly the other when we were together. But in 1982, when Governor Clinton was trying to regain the governorship, there had been no one in the history of Arkansas who had won, lost, and won again. So he's trying to get the office back, right? And I mentioned how I thought it was a good lesson. Well, the first thing he does out of the box is he says, I'm not going to go to any more segregated events in eastern Arkansas. Now, I'm from eastern Arkansas, and I've joined the campaign, and I'm saying to myself, well, hell, how are you going to go to events then, because they're all segregated? They're all segregated. And this is a part of the state that you have to win by an overwhelming majority. Where is the political, judgment in that? Well, there is significant political judgment if you believe that you don't want to just win, but you want to have the necessary pieces to govern. And if you're divided, even if I win, I just have the office. We don't really have a governing coalition. Now, hurry to 1992. He basically, well, first of all, you should know that we did finally have an integrated event. It took everybody a long time to figure out he was not coming. And then they had to decide, well, where do you do it? And that's a problem because that's someone's territory and that's someone's territory, and it's segregated. So basically they have the event, it's a fish fry, and it's at this little rural airport. And that's because that's where he's landing, all right? And so it's really nobody's land, it's just a place where he's landing and everybody gathers. And it's a great event. And people come together and they realize that they've been forced to do something that is really quite profound. Now, 1992, it's the same thing, but just slightly flipped. And that's when you go to Macomb County, Michigan one day, and you go to the heart of Detroit the next. And you tell the press, I'm the one who can do this.
And I'm giving the same speech in both
My
places.
favorite little
There
thing,
you go.
Mandy,
Right.
Rod, simple as important. He wanted diversity in the Secret Service agents. And we said, well, the Secret Service sends who they send. He said, no, goddamn it, we're going to have diverse Secret Service agents. Tell them we want, it's just a little bitty thing
That's right.
But it was,
that you don't
But a big
think of.
thing.
It was a long time ago, but when Vice President Bush was elected, he was elected in part because of an independent ad. It was not his campaign's ad, in fairness to a fine man who's 93 and not well. But an independent group ran an ad where they showed a convicted murderer, William Horton, who'd never been called Willie in his life. The ad maker named him Willie to make him look more frightening. And Governor Dukakis had continued a program his Republican predecessor started, by which people who were deemed eligible by the warden were allowed to get furloughs. Probably not smart policy, but it wasn't his, and whatever. It was total race baiting.
Right.
Okay, it was, again, in defense of Vice President Bush, really wasn't his ad, but it was an independent group. By the way, Roger Ailes was associated with that group. May God rest his soul. We should pray for the repose of his soul. He needs it. So they run this ad, and this, this freaks out all good people, but especially Democrats. And again, Governor Clinton went right into the teeth of that. He stood up there at the convention, and he said, I know about race baiting where I come from. He said, my part of the country, they divided white working people from black working people against each other the whole time, distracting them from their common economic interests. We're not going to do that anymore in America. And he had this great riff he did in every stump speech, but there's no them. All the Republicans,
Only
them.
us.
It's them, the gays, them, the blacks, them, the immigrants, them, the Jews, them, and he had, there's no them, there's only us. And, we're in such a different time, and yet many of the same sorts of divisions are being exploited. And I don't mean to talk about today, but back then, that was a really bold thing for a Southern governor,
Right.
a Democrat, which was the party, had been historically a party of segregation, even lynching, right? For a Democrat to stand up and say that was really important.
Exactly. And your running mate is from the South as well.
Right.
I mean, there was no
Yeah.
geographical balance being sought there. It's like, I'm going to go with the person who I think can be the best team member for me. And we're going to put the American people first, and we're going to have a cabinet that looks like America. And yes, if everybody works together, we're going to have the longest economic expansion in the nation's history.
I love this panel because I can just let you guys talk. And you're going to get to most of my questions anyways, which you have. But there are a couple of key moments that I want to get to, and then I want to open it up because this crowd of students is going to have better questions than I could ever come up with. We just finished watching The War Room. It starts in New Hampshire. I mean, New Hampshire was it, right, for you guys? It was the ball game for you guys in the beginning, in those early days. A lot of people don't remember the Iowa caucus existed, but everyone kind of skipped it because Senator Tom Harkin was running.
Yeah.
So you kind of just ceded home
Such a
field
legend,
advantage to him, right? So it was all about New Hampshire. And during that New Hampshire campaign, you all sustained body blow after body blow after body blow, and your numbers just started to tank. Talk to us about New Hampshire and its importance and how you guys viewed it both before, heading into it, and afterwards.
You want to start?
I mean, all I can say, there's so many things to say about it, and it was the most important part, but he was relentless. There was one point where he parked himself at the Mall of New Hampshire and just shook every damn hand.
Right.
I mean, I think there was one poll that said he had met 1 in 3, or the exit polls, 1 in 3 or 1 of 5 voters. Think about that. I know it's a small state, but it was extraordinary. He was not, the famous thing he said, I'll be with you till the last dog dies. He was going to campaign till the last dog dies.
Does anybody need an interpreter for that?
Rodney speaks Arkansas.
You can do that too.
In a weird way, surviving those body blows. I go back to what James said about people wanting to win. The whole country saw the body blows he took. And yeah, we were really clever declaring victory even though we didn't win. We were so clever that the Boston Globe wrote a piece a year later about the anniversary of our victory in New Hampshire, which we didn't have.
Which never happened.
And all of that was clever, but really we had reached bottom and come back. And we were able after that to say, all that stuff doesn't matter. People care about the economy. The unemployment rate is horrible. This man is talking about what he's going to do to fix the economy and help people's lives. And that's what people care about. And the fact that those attacks came and the vote was right after actually wound up being an incredibly important thing. And then just to that point about people wanting to win. Toughness, your character question, toughness. That as a campaign, we could rumble. Like, our candidates had just gotten mauled in campaign after campaign, that Willie Horton ad and so on. And there was something that made people lean in about Bill Clinton, just like, how could he survive that? They must be tough. We didn't actually name the war room until the Democratic Convention. Hillary suggested the name when we said we need to get organized with our opposition research. We're not together, and she said you need a war room. But the language was the language people wanted to hear. These people are ready to fight. Right. And his whole manner, every day in New Hampshire, every day of the campaign, I'd argue most of the presidency, was I am here to fight for you. Right. And people wanted that.
Those last 2 words, for you.
For you.
See, I have so many. Rodney, we had the best job. Mandy and James had to actually work. Rodney and I just traveled the country with Bill Clinton.
We had a great time.
If you ever get a chance to spend a year sitting on a 737 with Bill Clinton going to 48 states, I highly recommend it. And he had all these Clinton's laws.
Oh,
And
great
here's
laws.
a couple of them that I think sustained him through that, sustained us. right? Politics are always about the future, not the past. Okay, the attacks on him were about the past. And politics are always about you and not me. It's about your life, not mine. He'd say this all the time to me.
Yeah.
Because many of the attacks were about his personal life. He said, Paulie, if I make it about their life instead of mine, we will both be better off. And then he'd say that in public. And people would go, oh, yeah, good, okay. So this is so easy to say. It's so hard to do. It's so hard. Because, you're the candidate. It's your name there. It's your image. It's all about you. He went overnight. Those Georgetown speeches, not a single network covered them. Some very smart print reporters, E.J. Dionne, Ron Brownstein, Dave Lauder, a few. Joe Klein.
Yeah.
But there were no cameras there. No networks covered them. They didn't care. Like 3 weeks later, the scandals start hitting in New Hampshire. And, it wasn't just, like Deutsche Welle was there, not just ABC, NBC. We had like Bangkok TV on there. So he becomes instantly one of the most famous people in the world, and not for all the best reasons. And yet somehow he never made it about himself. He always made it about you. And he had the night of that New Hampshire primary, he said, the hits I've taken are nothing compared to the hits you've taken. And he remembered from memory people he'd met. Ronnie Makos Jr., who had a kid with a heart defect.
Yes.
Okay, and Mary Annie Davies, I was with him. Rodney was with him. Mary Annie was so ashamed. She was on Medicare, and she couldn't pay her heat bill and her medical bills, her prescription drugs, which we didn't have prescription drug under then. And she tried to explain this to the governor. She collapsed in tears. And he went over to her and just gave her this big, giant Bill Clinton hug and let her weep in his arms. So he always made it about you, not him, even when everything was about him. The whole story was him. That's a real act of political genius.
It is.
And hard.
So for young people, I'm thinking back to because the primaries are entirely different than the general was. And so we're in New Hampshire, and we go back, the weekend before the Tuesday, 9 days before that. We have to go back to Arkansas, and Harry Thomason had this little plane, and we would pack into that thing and fly in the middle of the winter from New Hampshire to Little Rock. And, so then we get there, and the polling comes in. And it's like a Saturday night, and we drop in like a turd in a well. And then,
which is what he said to the governor of Arkansas and the first lady in the meeting.
And it's Monday with 8 days to go. And we're back in Harry's plane, and it's like one of these clown cars. You got this little plane, and like people are just getting out of it. How did the plane hold that many people? The FAA would have had a fit if they knew how many people we had in there. And then we stand at this like Motel 6.
Yeah.
We were two to a room.
Tight budget.
Tight budget.
And sharing a room, Carvel and I don't know about you.
And
I do not recommend that.
We kept a towel so people would go in and out. And they'd wake you up in the middle of the night. Remember that?
Right. Nobody locked the doors. That's right.
And then Mandy was going on Nightline. And we were going on this. I have never seen a human being in my life fight that hard. There was an event in Kane, New Hampshire. If I've ever seen anything in my life, and I've seen World Series, I've seen anything that you can imagine and organize, I've never seen a human being perform at a level like that, and as consistent as it. But that night in Kane was just unbelievable. And when there's just at some point. And I think it was New Hampshire where there's just, honestly, there's a will to win.
Yeah.
There's just a will to win. And I think that he had that. And it's like the campaigns have like changed a lot, even like the primaries. I mean, you go and it's kind of big airplanes and, we didn't have motorcades. And it was very...
We didn't have Secret Service in New Hampshire
for a long time,
Yeah, we used to laugh. The cell phones were bigger than George Stephanopoulos.
Well, they still are.
Yeah. And I see people in campaigns today, and at some level, and they get algorithms, and they got this, and the emotional and human element of it, or people doing something, or being, in the Motel 6 with two people to a room, and and everybody having scrambled eggs in the morning. There's something to that.
Yeah.
And it's something that people today, I know it's like the old guy coming here like slobbering, you know. You were there when I was there, you know. I walked so goddamn far to school, and it was, you know, barefoot too. But I mean, it was. I'm really at some level. It was like so, and you kind of knew it at some point, as exhausted as you were, that there was really something in, you know, all of us have remained friends over all of these years. And I don't know, but that New Hampshire was just in that
Brutal.
motel, it was just brutal, but and I was just sitting in Kings, man, this guy is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's just unbelievable.
That's right.
But the other thing is the spotlight, which we had for all the wrong reasons, he used to his great advantage. Because we knew if anybody could see what James was talking about in Keene, he'd have every vote. He was that good.
Yeah.
And we had this incredible spotlight. We bought time, remember this, James? We bought time to do our own town halls, our own televised town hall, so people could see what people asked and see him answer. And we put him on every television show we could, even though we knew they'd ask some of the questions we didn't want to hear about, because we knew he knew how to answer.
Can we go back to the town hall?
Yeah.
Again, the late Roger Ailes did that for Nixon years ago. But Roger, being a TV producer, stacked the room, and he had scripted questions from archetypal people.
Right.
If you go back and read Roger's book, he even used some very, very racist language to talk about the kinds of people he wanted there. We were the first campaign that ever did this, maybe the last. We asked the University of New Hampshire to choose the audience for us. We went to the political science department and said, look, you know who we're running, you know, but it's an open
to
primary.
get undecided voters.
We said we prefer undecided voters who are going to vote in the New Hampshire Democratic primary, but you pick whoever you want. And they can ask anything they want. And they invariably...
And we promoted that.
And we invariably, they asked about jobs, health care, you know, their lives, their future. Nobody asked about the scandals that all the reporters were asking. And we used that. It was a strategy to shame the reporters. There's a picture that I love. It's actually it was on the cover of one of the editions of Tom Patterson's book about covering campaigns. Teddy Davis is here. Teddy was in my class years ago. He's got that book. The picture is Bill Clinton talking to an army of reporters, almost a full circle of them, and there are hundreds, scores of microphones in his face. That was deliberate. Okay, we did that on purpose. Where's Steve Domenico, our advance man? Okay, Domenico and advance men and women carry a multiple box. It's a box of multiple different. So this is why when the president speaks, there's just one microphone, even though there's 50 cameras, right? It's a really simple deal, and it doesn't clutter the picture. We threw the malt box away on purpose, because we wanted people to see that this young governor was being besieged, but he was still in there fighting for you. I mean, we used that spotlight, but we used it to feed his narrative.
Right.
And this is something I think with all the algorithms we lose. You have to have a hero. You have to have a villain. You have to have a victim who is in peril, and then hopefully, right, a denouement where the hero is overcoming the trials and tribulations to save the victim. And he never lost sight of the need for a narrative, and he used whatever came up. He would use that narrative. I mean, use that fact or that exigency to feed his narrative.
Yeah. You know, can I just
go ahead.
I also think that in order to be in that position, you have to have an interesting mindset. And if your mindset is based on sort of an attitude of gratitude, whatever comes, I'm just blessed to be here, right? And to have this opportunity to speak for those who, were they here, they would try to speak for themselves. But I'm here, I'm the vehicle, and I'm just happy to be here, taking on all comers. So I think having that grounding is something that helps you to weather all of that incoming fire.
I need to go to questions from the audience, but I want to ask one more before we do. We've spent a lot of time talking about him. I want to talk about the campaign for a second. There's a scene at the very end of the movie, James, where you talk the night before the election, you're talking to the team, and you talk about how you have changed the way campaigns operate forever. And you kind of demolished the old campaign hierarchy that used to drive all these campaigns. I am very curious. You know, you mentioned Hillary came up with the phrase "the war room," but talk to us about how you organized the campaign, how it was different, how you do think it changed politics moving forward.
It sounds so like obvious now, but Well, we determined, and Mandy, Paul, I mean, probably as much as anybody too, is that news cycles had become unbelievably compressed. It used to be in politics that you'd have an event and Scotty Reston would write something and then somebody would take the kind of lead off of the nightly news, and then it would, and this was the advent of like CNN and so the idea is that, in the military strategy, you got there the first with the most. And so I wanted to design a campaign that was built on speed, that everybody was in the same room, everybody could communicate, everybody was the road. And Paul and I worked really hard because it felt like campaigns used to have a real friction between the headquarters and the road, because the people in the road say, "Oh, them son of a bitches are sitting there eating steak every day,
that's right.
having drinks." And the people in the campaign office, you can't get them to do nothing. They're stupid. We're trying to tell them what to do, and they're not. So
We didn't say that all the time.
And so it was really built. And those things that were, it's a culture. And I think if you instill the right culture, so the big thing was everybody had to run to the copying machine. It was kind of stupid, but it said that really we try to do things fast and we try to get it right. And we had and Bush would give the acceptance speech at the Republican convention. We had broken down, we got the advance copy, and we had answered it before he spoke. Okay, I mean, these are little things that you do that I think that make a difference. So and then we organized it that we were nimble, we could react quickly and act quickly and get talking points out, get research out, change schedules. And it's just so much of what you do is not grand strategy. It's like, oh, they're going to go ask these people. You got to get them on the phone, you got to do this, and you got to go to the Bob friends of Bill, the Arkansas people, the Georgetown friends, the conversation, the policy people. And basically my job was to keep them away so Paul and Mandy and Rodney and other people could do their job. I mean, I was like the rodeo clown, that just kind of keeps the bull away. I didn't do anything smart.
Well. Yeah. Two things. One is, first of all, the thing that I picked up at the end was James saying I was 30 before I came to Washington, D.C. And I was 40 before I won my first campaign. I mean, come on. The president was selecting like-minded people. There was something about the people he was able to attract because of who he was and who they were as well. But I wanted to deal with the nimbleness question because I think one of the best examples was California. And things were pretty much in good shape by then, but just before the primary, there was this reaction to the verdict that involved the Rodney King beating. And there was all of the commotion. I think this was the end of April going into May or something like that. And there was the burning, the looting. I mean, it was a tough time. But we got there first. And I remember going to First AME Church one night.
With Chip
Murray.
Chip Murray, Pastor Murray.
That's right. And we were there with him and a group that he had assembled. And we were talking about what had happened and, frankly, how leadership from the federal level could be helpful. And so the president was getting all of this, or the governor, was getting all of this good feedback and able to speak to. But we were there first. He was walking down those streets that had been gutted because of the looting. And he was talking about how we have to come together to address this and that it takes all of us to do it. Now, the president got there, but he was there a week or so later. Yeah. And I just thought that it was important to make the point that getting in early, not being afraid now.
Right.
Okay? And being able to manage the relationships and the dynamics of the situation, that takes skill, and it takes good work. It takes good staff.
And there was a historical precedent for that,
Yes.
that he was affected by, and everybody was.
Yes.
When Martin Luther King was assassinated, Robert Kennedy stopped in Indianapolis.
That's right.
Right there.
Bill Clinton was a student here.
That's right.
Here. And that really
Yes.
impressed him, that when you have something like this that happens, that you get there and,
Yes.
and deal with it immediately. And that was just if you're his age, the Robert Kennedy Indianapolis thing sticks with you. He was a student at Georgetown.
Well, you know what he did? He and a friend got somebody's white station wagon, painted a red cross on it, and drove into the riot.
That's right. That's exactly
to bring
right.
assistance.
This was 68.
To folks.
Bill
So-
Clinton did.
But
Yeah.
Bill Clinton did, not
As a
he was
student.
17. As a student. He was your age, and he thought, oh, there's a riot going on. I'm a Southern white boy. Let me go in there. But that's him. But here's what James, I'll get back to Mo's question. What James brought to this effort is emblematic in what Rodney's talking about, which is really rare in life, much less in politics, which is a culture that sought out risk. The risk tolerance. Anytime any of my students ask me, like, for career advice, like, the beginning and the end of it is boost your risk tolerance. You're gonna fail 100%, or else you're not trying hard enough. You're not doing something hard enough. So I guarantee you're gonna fail. That's fine. What's your tolerance for that? What's your ability to come back from that? Bureaucracy is defined by a complex organization that punishes risk-taking that fails more than it rewards risk-taking that succeeds. And James created a system, and we were very risk-averse as an institution before James took over and before Hillary created the war room. We were, as a campaign. People don't make movies about that, but we were often stymied because we'd have these massive conference calls, and anybody could veto anything. And Hillary changed that. She put James in charge of the war room, and he gave us this culture of risk tolerance, which was perfectly in sync with our candidate.
Yeah.
I mean, if people today, or any other, before or after that campaign, would be astonished at what a seat-of-the-pants operation we were on the plane. Rodney and I, Bruce Reed, Dee Dee Myers, D.G. Wilhelm, it wasn't, I don't know, it was a small group. And we had this massive war room behind us, with Mandy with all her ads and the research, but ultimately, we'd just chew the fat with the guy over breakfast. And I'd write something on an index card, would be sort of the money bite, the quote that we wanted on the news that night. And you could just roll it out and say, why don't you try this? And he would get it right away.
Yeah.
He would embrace it. He wouldn't say, oh, I have to check with the focus groups, I'm scared, I gotta call the governor. He just would go.
Yeah.
He trusted his instincts, and he trusted his team, and really that culture change came because of James Carville.
And Mandy, I think my favorite part of the war room, I was just thinking about it, because I had this thing that, look, by 8:30, we're going to do it. You better have a good reason that we're not. But we're not going to sit here.
Action bias.
And so then I'm saying, like, God damn, Mandy, you say, oh, do this, you can't do this, you do that, you can't do that. God damn it, just do, oh, no, man, she's great. She's fine. You want 30 seconds, James. You're giving me a 45-second slot. I don't know. Go figure it out.
My favorite thing about that is I didn't know I was being filmed.
So, but Paul, you have to have a bias to action. All right? And then so when somebody comes up and says, well, you can't do that because, okay, well, but, because we're pulling the trigger here at 8:30. We're going with the talking points. We're going with the schedule. This is, and I had, creative people, and, you just got to give people a cover to do what they got to do.
Brazil, the sign story in the war room, I always thought was the most interesting thing, because it shows exactly how the war room operated, how James got people swinging into action, all the things you would do, but it didn't pan out.
Right.
But they left it in anyway, because, and it's the most, in a way, the most insightful part of the movie. It really shows you, like, here you're confronted with something, you go all the way to the wall to make it work, doesn't work, you move on to the next thing. Right. And I thought it was so interesting that they left it in there, even though nothing happened with it, because it really shows you what that campaign was like.
And when you screwed up, he had your back.
Yeah.
James did, the governor did.
Yeah.
In the primaries, on the night of the New Hampshire primary, which we survived and did not win, but we were pretty happy. So we flew all night for the Georgia primary.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sitting on a plane, tired, not drunk actually, but just tired, with Adam Nagurney, then of USA Today, now with the New York Times. Adam is a great guy, a brilliant reporter, and he knew how to push my buttons. He knew that I really didn't like Paul Tsongas. really didn't like Senator Tsongas.
The person who had actually won the New Hampshire
won.
primary
Yes.
So
wasn't smart enough to declare victory.
Nagurny starts needling me about it. And now we're going to Georgia, which is home territory for Carville and me. We'd worked for the governor there. The governor was for us. We knew like we could fight, and we were happy to survive in the Northeast. We knew we could fight in the South.
Yeah.
So we're sitting on the plane. So instead of saying that like a strategist, I got personal. And I said, and Nagurny's like, Senator Tsongas is so wonderful. He's so admirable. And he never lies like you do. And he's, And so I said, listen, Adam, you have puffed that son of a bitch up, and now we're going to take that son of a bitch down. You live by the puff, you die by the puff. So he writes that in America's newspaper, faithfully and accurately. Son of a bitch, excuse me. So I called St. Paul, a cancer survivor and beloved senator who had just won New Hampshire. I called him a really foul. So one of the people we traveled with had a yellow highlighter who would mark the stupid things I said in the newspaper and share that with me. And it was terrible, and everybody was mad at me, and they should have been. It derailed us for a news cycle. And Tsongas was very adept at exploiting that. The governor called me in, and I thought, okay, this is it. I was 31. I was 1 year out of law school. I had no business being there. I kept waiting for the grown-ups to say, you're not allowed here. And this was the day. He calls me in. He said, did you say that? And I said, yes, sir, I did. I mean, I wasn't going to lie, and Adam got it right. He wasn't taping it, but exactly what I said. He said, yeah, that's exactly what I said, and I hate that son of a bitch. And he said, I want you to apologize to him. I said, yes, sir, I will. And I did, and then he said, I want you to keep swinging for me. I know what happened there, and I know that you screwed up, but don't let this take you out of your game. I need you in this thing, and I need you fighting for me. And to this day, I'd go through a brick wall for that man, because he backed me up when I screwed up.
Yep.
Very good.
All right. I want to now open it up to questions from the audience.
That just reminds me of one of my favorite stories. In 2008, when Bill Richardson didn't endorse Hillary, I called him Judas. And so Larry King and Bill Richardson, I wasn't me, and said, now the New York Times, said this, what do you have to say? And I said, well, actually, I was quoted accurately and in context.
All right. So I'm going to call on you. We got some people with microphones who'll come up, tell us who you are, where you're from, and then ask your question. So let's start right here. Jennifer, right up here.
Got two right there.
Please.
Okay. Hi, my name is Zachary Herzog. I'm a graduate student here at Georgetown, and my question is, it had been mentioned that about the need to lead from the center out, and my question to you guys is how do you see that working in a especially polarized environment that we see ourselves in now? It seems like the left and right are so far apart in their politics. How do you see leading from the center out in today's environment?
Well, I actually think that it's all the more important because of the polarization. I think when you really, it takes skill and it takes persistence. And you've got to be able to, stand the pushback, because there will be those who will disparage. But I think that, there's more that unites us than divides us. And I think even the president has said that, there's nothing bad about America that can't be fixed with what's good about America. And I just think that it takes that kind of level-headed engagement. And I think you got to trust the American people. You've got to believe that if you hang in there and make your case, that you have a shot at convincing them. So I think it's all the more important in times like these.
The other thing I would say, which I think history has washed away, we ran to the left of Paul Tsongas. Mm-hmm. And so it is true that Bill Clinton has the centrist past that Rodney described to you, talked about welfare reform, was pro-death penalty, took some positions that Democratic candidates had not normally taken. But Paul Tsongas was much more conservative, We attacked him for wanting to cut Medicare, and we did it pretty effectively. We were to the left of him. And, sometimes it's just about the luck of the draw of who you were running against.
Yeah, that's true.
It is an odd combination of characters who were in the finals for that year. It was just unusual that there weren't more liberal candidates who sort of made it to the finals. I'd also say his politics, his policy positions were an unusual mix. As I think we've talked about, his economic policies were extremely populist. He was talking about holding Wall Street accountable, calling people on the carpet. He was talking about personal responsibility for corporations, like at the bottom of the ladder and the top of the ladder. So it wasn't just a left-right thing in the sense that you might think about it today. It was actually a more interesting mix. Conservative on some social issues, I think pretty liberal on economic issues.
And I should mention, I don't think we've mentioned him up to this point, but I think Ron Brown, as the chair of the party, was an honest broker in that whole process.
That's part of Chairman Wilbur.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
he just basically said, look, if you're going to get in, get in. If you're not going to get in, these are our candidates. This is the one who's doing well right now. Let's let it go. Let's let it play out. But don't shoot from the sidelines.
He was unbelievable, and I mean, he stayed, do things at conventions are very, very good way. See, when we did the campaign, in fact, strategic doctrine is that you tried to, you won your primary and you tried to get it, and it was swing voters and everything. And after the 2000 election, a guy's actually a pretty good guy, Matt Dowd, wrote a memo saying that elections are no longer won by swing voters, they were won by rallying your own people. So as opposed to, like when Mandy would make a spot or Paul would write a speech, or would do a schedule, we were thinking of somebody in Ohio that might have voted for Kennedy and then voted for Reagan or whatever it was back then. After that, it became somebody, a lethargic Democrat who may or may not vote, that you would excite that person into voting. That became the number one strategic imperative. And the consequence of that, and then it brings to fruition where somehow or another people it was identity politics, economic politics, because the white working class, believed that the economy, and I can tell people, Democrats live in an economy, okay? The people of color live in an economy. Gay people live in an economy. College professors live in an economy. Single white mothers live in an economy. And so where did we ever come up with this idea that the only people that live in the economy is a 51-year-old non-college guy in Wisconsin? I mean, he does, but everybody else does too. And if you don't speak to people at a level, in a way that they understand, in an emotional way, this is a human connection. I mean, that's the one thing that Bill Clinton understood. Right. At the end of the day, you can have all the algorithms you want and all of the anything that you have. At the end of the day, this business is a human connection. Somebody is saying, I'm going to allow you to have power, and I'm going to trust you to have that power that you're going to do something to me. And when you work around the world, as I have, people are afraid of power, because usually power is coming to put them in jail or take their job away or shoot them or whatever else it is. And you got to understand, and if they think that you're granting them that power and they understand your life and what you're going through, they're more likely to give you that power. If they think that you have that power and you're distracted or you're abstract, then they're going to be less likely to.
All right, let's take another question from the audience. Right up here.
Hi, I'm Joseph Majida. I'm a freshman here at the college in Georgetown, and I'm from Queens, New York, as the accent shows. My question is, if Bill Clinton was running against Donald Trump, do you think he would have won? And if he would have won, why did Hillary not win?
Welcome to Georgetown.
Hey, that's what you're here for. That's what we're here for.
No, that's right. You're supposed to ask questions like that. What's wrong with that?
Now you want an answer.
James, you may well say how you sort of always frame up this last election, which is what people will remember 100 years from now.
The what now?
About the election. Anyway, one of the things James always says, I'll quote him even though he's sitting right next to me, is that 100 years from now, what people remember about the election is not even just that Queens gave us our first president from Queens. It's that a hostile foreign power interceded on behalf of one candidate, and the head of the FBI, violating all Justice Department guidelines, interceded to attack one of the candidates. Not once, but twice. That's what's astonishing. I mean, the president's victory is really impressive. It's important. It ought to be analyzed. My side really needs to study and learn, think what we got wrong. And the answer is a lot. I helped advise a super PAC that attacked Donald Trump. I did a lot of things I would do differently, a lot of things I did wrong. But that's the most important thing. Now, absent that, Hillary's our president. There's no question about it, I think. There's just no question. So that's not to, and absent that, everybody who worked for her would be a genius now. They'd be handing out Nobel Prizes to all of them, right? Instead, now everybody's saying that they're all horrible and terrible and stupid and they hate each other. That's the consequence of failure. But I'm biased. But I put Bill Clinton up against, I put him up against FDR. I put him up against Lincoln. I mean, he's the greatest political talent I've ever seen.
Who are the guys that interviewed me for the podcast? Are they here? All right. Understand this. The hostile foreign power, domestic violence, and they say, well, Hillary's campaign made mistakes. Guess what? Every campaign made mistakes. They said we raised taxes 125 times, and then somebody comes to the campaign and says, oh, no, we raised them 129 times. Right? We went to Mississippi 8 days before the election.
Yes, we
all
did.
right? We went to the rope line. We would repeat the charge. We would do all kinds. Houston Astros made errors. All right? They threw in the wrong thing. But the idea, if the umpire has rigged the game, that's the story. That's the real story. It's not the story, well, she should have gone to Pittsburgh and not Punxsutawney. Maybe so. And maybe that would have been a good idea. But what everybody wants you to do about this race is forget the macro story. And, of course, she made mistakes. We made mistakes. You couldn't have anything as unruly and as big and as ad hoc as a presidential campaign and not make mistakes. And should we learn from that? Of course we should. But we should never get away from what happened. And I'm telling you, when they get through with it, the level is gonna blow people away. And now we see in the Facebook and the everything else coming out. Not saying that mistakes were not made. I'm saying but we made a lot of mistakes in '92, and then we were geniuses. Right. They made mistakes. Everybody, this is a mistake.
By the way, we got 43%, and we're geniuses.
All right, let's take the next
Hillary
question.
got 48, 49?
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Anusha. I'm from the Bay Area, California. And my question is, so on election night, obviously the results went the way you all wanted it to, but what was the hardest part of the night?
Of 92?
In '92?
Just waiting. Everything else was beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, the crowds downtown, Little Rock, it was just electric. And interestingly, if you go there now, because of the library, you've got all of that development beyond the very stately old Capitol building. But at that time, there were only a few buildings that extended in that direction, and there were just people everywhere. And if you notice from the movie, it looked like you were sort of in the zone of a carnival with all the lights and all of the flashing cameras and the like. I mean, it was just, it was electric.
Let me ask a follow-up.
Yes.
I mean, at the end game, the polls were going your way, right?
Yes,
I mean, most people in the country
definitely.
kind of felt like they knew where it was going to be. What kept you up at night in that final week?
The CNN poll, they changed their methodology. The funniest thing in the '92 campaign was Hanna S. Thompson's description of Bill Clinton eating French fries at Dozy Place. I mean, that was like, have journalism like that. anymore. I mean, there's so many memories that you have. We're going back there in 2 weeks, but
I was sure we were going to win. Rodney and I were on the road with him, and so we had a different perspective. But in September, we went to Parrott, Georgia. Again, which I'd been because I'd worked for the governor. Parrott, Georgia. My recollection is about 3,000 souls in Parrott, Georgia. We drew 10,000.
Right.
Literally, people came from miles around to see a Democrat in South Georgia. And that night, we're in some little motel in Vidalia, if memory serves, and I called Georgie and I said, we're going to win. Mm-hmm. We're going to win. I mean, I know Georgia. If we carry Georgia, criminy, we're going to carry Pennsylvania. Yeah. So I wasn't that worried. But for me, most hyper-competitive people are much more motivated by fear of failure than the thrill of victory. Okay, you just you have about a second or two where you, okay, this is what it's like on top of Mount Everest, right? And then that's it. Then you got to work on the speech. Yeah, you got to get down. You got to work on the speech. You got to get. But it's that sense. It's a sense of relief. Oh, there you are. I was looking for you. A sense of relief. It was. It's almost too daunting to think about. It's in the movie, I think. Georgie and I were on the phone. He's like, okay, we're going to be like Butch and Sundance. They each just grab the belt and jump off the cliff. We had no idea what was coming. But it's those sorts of feelings. It's not, I was in LA when my Astros won the World Series. I was at the game. Okay? That was way more thrilling because my ass wasn't on the line. I could just drink beer and jump up and down. So that's a much better night, actually, weirdly.
Yeah. Remember, you're in Nats country.
remember, George and I were at the headquarters, and George was an altar boy in the Greek Orthodox Church, and I was a pre-Vatican II altar boy in the Roman Catholic Church. We were not raised on good news. We were not equipped for optimism.
And then
We were all going to hell when we died. And there's going to be misery in between, goddamn. Get on your knees and stay there.
All right, let's take another question. Right up here, yeah.
I can still say the Confidio.
So I'm Charles Hansel. I'm from Rochester, Minnesota. I'm a freshman in the SFS. This last election, my congressional district, the first district of Minnesota, swung from 2 points for Obama to 14 for Trump because it's a very working class district. And so I'm wondering, obviously you mentioned other factors in the election, but when you saw a swing so far toward the Republicans among white working class voters, which we know are overrepresented in both House districts and in the Senate. In terms of a legislative approach, how do you see Democrats gaining back districts like that in the House or seats like that in the Senate that may not skew toward their current demographic advantage?
Yeah, you're in a country that's changing very, very rapidly, and your home area is changing very, very rapidly. But in some ways, it's always been that way. When we started planning out Bill Clinton's campaign, you need to understand, California had voted Republican in 9 of the previous 10 presidential elections. And even by election day, Bill Clinton did significantly better in West Virginia than he did in California. There's 55 counties in West Virginia, almost all of them white working class. And we carried 33 out of the 55 counties. Barack Obama in 2012, Hillary Clinton in 2016 combined, you know how many they carried in West Virginia? Okay, now, that's a problem for my party, presuming you're for our party, those of us who are Democrats, right? And we do have to think, we have to do 2 things at once. We have to acknowledge the historical, spectacular wrongdoing that was in this election, but then what did we do wrong, and what do we need to do to? I mean, at least Carville and I would come. I don't have a favorite in 2020. I have no idea who ought to run or who should win, but I'm looking for somebody who's going to begin by saying, I want to amend the Constitution and take big money out of politics. Okay, I worked for a super PAC, raised $250 million the last 2 elections. I'd like to put them out of business. A 28th Amendment of the Constitution. And that starts to open the eyes and the minds of working class folks who we keep saying, I have a government program that will help you. And they say, the government's corrupt. And so we can't get through. We can't scale the walls of their skepticism or cynicism because of that. I'd begin with that. I'd follow on with a real jobs package, the way President Trump promised, the way Hillary promised, but President Trump has not delivered. A real, to fix up the roads, the bridges, the infrastructure, to give the dignity of work to people who don't have a law school degree like I do or a fancy college degree like you will soon. And then third, I'd have earned educational and training benefits, not free college. I just disagree with Senator Sanders about this. I think that the better model is President Clinton's AmeriCorps or frankly, military service. If you're willing to serve, then we'll give you a stipend. We'll pay for your education or job training or skills advancement or community college. And that way first off, I think it's better policy. I think it's better morality. But I also think it's better politics. Because when Democrats say, oh, you're for free college, it sounds smarty pants and very expensive. And so my grandmother, who was a maid, is going to have to pay more in taxes so that you can get a free education. That's the kind of class warfare that works against it. So I'm looking for those kind of big ideas that go right to the heart of it. But again, getting back to the idea of trying to stitch people back together, which Hillary tried desperately to do and her husband did when he ran. When he first began running, I was talking to him about these wedge issues that Lee Atwater, the late Republican strategist, always had wedge issues to divide Democrats. And I said, Governor, we need some wedge issues of our own, divide their coalition. He said, no, Polly, we need web issues. And he stitched his fingers. He said, this is the only hope we have.
Exactly.
Is stitch folks back together, especially across the racial divide he was talking about then. Yeah. But to me, that would be a prescription, at least, to talk to those folks. And we want them back. We need them. They're good people.
Right, and if I may, let me just say that being a son of the South myself, I'm not, I don't want to be a part of an effort that just sort of concedes the South to the Republican Party. I don't think that is good for the country in the long haul. So I think that's why I really, I just don't think we can, and I think we've got to figure out what the answers are to avoid that. And I'm just concerned, frankly, about some of the comments of the day that cause us to get back into this I-thou kind of mentality rather than we, us, our, and finding the common ground and the common good. Those are the things that make us stronger, I believe.
Yeah, there's this big discussion in Alabama. Roy Moore is probably the most hideous Senate candidate that I can never remember. And a guy named Doug Jones is running. He prosecuted the people that bombed
the Birmingham,
the
Baptist,
Democratic
16th
Party
Baptist Church.
Can't go out and fight against Roy Moore, then why do we exist? Why have a party? If we're going to say we're going to target that and the Cook PVI is plus 14, so we can't do that, well then pack the whole goddamn thing up and leave. If not, we can't do that. I mean, if it's something this obvious, and by the way, if we'll come back in the South one day, but if we get really good candidates that run and we don't support them because it's not targeted right, then they're not going to be good people running next time. And I'm not telling you that I think Doug Jones can win. Doug Jones thinks he can win. And if he thinks he can win, then I'm going to help him do everything I can for him to win. Right. But at some point, you got to be something. I mean, if Roy Moore, who believes that the gay rights ruling was worse than Dred Scott, then what do you have to do? What else can you say? What else can you say?
Doug Brinkley, the presidential historian, has said one of the things about Bill Clinton's, one of the most important things Bill Clinton did when he ran was he ran, right? And it goes back to that exactly. 91% approval rating that George H.W. Bush had, and it gets to the point you just made, James.
But
exactly.
I don't think any of you quite answered the legislative question, because you want to win the first. And I work a lot in I work a lot in Minnesota. I work for both of your senators.
Yes.
And
now this is what Mandy did during the campaign.
Keep you focused. There's a tax fight we're about to have that is reminiscent of the tax fight Bill Clinton had against trickle-down economics. Right. We're here again. And that is going to be a fight, given what they've put out there, that is going to help Democratic candidates in this country, because I can't believe what they have proposed and how skewed it is against the middle class and how much it is. What's the Bill Clinton line for those people who drive limousines instead of people with pickup trucks? So I think that is going to be a big difference in your district.
Clock is ticking and I'm getting a sign, so let me try to get another one right up here, sir. Yeah.
Hi, James. I had a question about your career in politics. By the way, my name is Kishan. I'm a professor in physics here.
Wait a minute. Professor in physics.
Yeah.
Can we go to someone else?
This is softball. So in the movie, James, you give an emotional speech at the end, and then you mentioned about how you hadn't been to New York or DC until you were age 33, and you hadn't won a race until you were 42. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. I try to forget it.
About that, if you were working in politics in only Louisiana until you were 33, and what is it like then doing politics elsewhere in the country? How to compare, or is it different?
Yeah.
And then secondly, the second question is not meant as an insult, but if you didn't win a race until you're 42, how did you keep getting work? It's not just you. There's a lot of people in politics who.
Let's close out with that.
I love this guy. Negative campaigning is my favorite part. That's great.
That's a good question. I was in Baton Rouge. I was working for the mayor. I never thought I would ever leave Baton Rouge. And I sat in my desk one day and said, I'm going to jail, I'm going crazy, I'm going out of town. And I said, option 3. And I called, actually, Peter Hart and Mark Shields had done some sort of polling. I called them and said, I got to find a job. So Peter Hart says, I think you got a knack for this. You got me a job running a Senate campaign in Virginia, which promptly lost. Then a guy called me from Texas. I go there Labor Day of 1983, and I meet somebody fresh out of the University of Texas named Paul Begala, of which we commenced to get 43% in the general election. And then I was broke and out of work and didn't have anything to do, and a guy called me from Pennsylvania, Jack Dyke, and he says, we want to interview you for a job to run a governor's campaign. I said, good, you got to pay my expenses. He said, okay, we'll get your ticket and we'll reimburse it. No, I don't have $265. You have to send me that extra check so I can buy the ticket. Sat in, I went out and met a guy by the name of Bob Casey, and he said, what's the story? I said, well, he's run 3 times before and he's lost all 3 times. And I'm thinking there saying, well, we the 2 ugliest people the night before the prom. Anybody? This thing is not going anywhere. And then they had a young Paul Begala who was in law school who just said, you know what? I like this guy. I'm going to just defer my legal education.
Dropped out 3
and
times.
dropped out with a guy a campaign manager that had never won a campaign and a candidate that never won a campaign. Good bet. Try it one day. And it kind of took off from there. I knew a lot. I learned a lot the hard way. I mean, when you get your brains beat in, you learn.
Yeah.
It's politics. I remember I left politics. After that, I went to Kentucky, and a guy said, you don't understand Kentucky because Louisiana's a north-south state, and Kentucky's an east-west state. That's the biggest.
Really? Yeah.
The principles of politics, of communicating, are universal. And I've worked in different countries, different states, and everybody wants to make it this opaque, arcane thing that only the elect can ever understand. And that's not true. To do politics good and to understand it is a matter of feel. It's like getting your brains beat in and learning the hard way and like talking to other people who know more than you do, and particularly surround yourself with people like these guys on the stage. But it's not something. I remember I said, man, these people went to Princeton and Stanford and everything. And you sit at the table one day and say, well, shit, they don't know any more than I do, so I'll just say something anyway. But your question is very good.
Yeah.
It's a very good question, and I was basically forced into doing it.
So I want to close out because this is a good segue to the last question I want to ask. Look, as I mentioned, I was sitting in Gaston Hall when he came here and gave the New Covenant speech, and I never thought about politics. Right? I wanted to go into the Foreign Service, and the people that drafted the Foreign Service exam had a different idea for me. But it inspired me, right? I took a bus up to New Hampshire to go knocking on doors for you guys, and I started my career because of this. There aren't a lot of people out there that are inspiring right now. And we hear more and more young people who'd rather go off to Silicon Valley to change the world than do this. And so maybe the most cliche question of the night, but I think one of the most important, what advice do you give to young people about getting into politics and public service, and what advice would you give them on how to do it?
We are going to have the best field of candidates in 2020 that you can imagine. The people that are being talked about are some of the most talented people I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And young people, go listen to someone, find somebody that you connect with, go out, and if you see somebody and say, that person moves me, then just go do it. Mm-hmm. And I will tell any Democrat this, for God's sakes, if you're under 65 and you can follow the mirror and put two sentences together, run. And let people see, man, this is a party that has ideas. Let the Terry McAuliffes, let the Elizabeth Warrens, let the Steve Bullocks, the Mitch Landrieu's, the Kamala Harrises, the whoever it is out there, the Amy Klobuchar, I don't care. For God's sakes, man, run, and Bill Clinton will emerge.
Exactly.
Every time that you think things are so bad, they get better. And we have some really, really, our mayors are unbelievably talented. But look at the stuff that, that Rob's accomplished and things like that. I don't know who's going to run, but my advice is, for God's sakes, get out there. And somebody is going to move people in this thing.
Right, and it works the other way, too. In other words, they're going to be motivated by you, those politicians. They're going to be inspired by you. They're kind of down on their heels right now, on their knees. They're kind of been clocked. I mean, our leaders in our party. And what revivifies them is they go. I'm sure you've probably gone to them. Go to an Indivisible meeting. Indivisible didn't exist 12 months ago. It's all across the country now. And it's some of it's young people. I mean, I was telling Mandy this. My oldest son, 25 years old, never had any interest in politics. He's a fishing guide in Alaska. Okay, and he was a great fishing guide. But he'd go up to Alaska, and when it got cold, he'd come home, and, casual, occasional voter. Forgot to vote for President Obama in 2012. Thanks a lot. I was working for President Obama in 2012. Again, the jobs issue not as important to my son than to me. He comes home from Alaska in October. Now, he really worships Hillary Clinton. He was raised right. And so his hero is beaten by someone he thinks is not quite as wonderful a person. But here's what happened, and this is what's inspirational about your generation. He didn't get bitter, he got better. He dropped his nets, as it were, his fly fishing rod in this case, and signed up to work for Ralph Northam in Virginia. And as we speak, he is in Pigeon Forge, Virginia, turning out white working class voters. So that's what's going to save us is guys, gals your age who say, hell, I'm going to go do it. We're just old and washed up, and we're like Bruce Springsteen Glory Days songs, okay? you all are what's going to revivify the country.
I think it's the greatest time for activism since the 60s and 70s, since the Vietnam War movement, the environmental movement, women's movement time. You have more people. There is no way healthcare would have been defeated if it had not been for the activism of the American people.
That's right.
I hope that is true of this tax plan. There is more activity. The number of women running for office is staggering since the Women's March. It is a great time to get involved and make a difference. I totally disagree with you.
Yeah.
Great time to get involved.
And go on.
No.
I'd offer this. When I first met the Clintons, they were talking about their experience with the McGovern campaign. That was a losing campaign. But they were talking about being involved in it and the people they met. And if you look closely at the organization in 1992, Eli Siegel, I mean, we can go down the list. There are a lot of people
Sandy Berger?
That's right, who were part of that effort. Then my last comment is we've got our little daughter who was born in 93. She was on her way to medical school now. I love that and love that for her. But after the campaign, she started talking about continuing college, but business and law, and she was clearly upset with the outcome. And I think she started to think about, what can I do to fight against that? You see what I'm saying? And I think you've got, as has been noted, a lot of individuals like yourselves saying, what can I do to fight against that? How can I use what I want to become to make the country better and to get us back on the path of becoming this more perfect union. So we applaud you.
Yep.
Amen.
Yeah, I think, look, I think it's the best time in the world to be a motivated young person.
Yeah.
And just go out. Just go. Just do it. What do you got? 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Just go out and do it. And you'll probably, you'll fall down and stumble and then just do it again. But look at what you got. Look at the country. Look at what we can do. Look at the issues that we face with. You're fortunate to be at this time, I think. I really do.
Oh, definitely.
I could do this all night. James, Rodney, Paul, Mandy, thank you so much.
Good job, man.